Mr. Comey, the U.S. just announced to leave the UN Council on Human Rights. Is that a surprise to you?
I don't know. I've seen the headlines, but I haven't studied it enough to understand what the thinking is there. So I really can't say. I haven't followed it closely enough to be surprised or not be surprised. It
is mostly about the approach towards Israel, or the behavior by the Council towards Israel by other members. Is that something telling you about how the administration handles foreign relations?
I don't know what the administration's strategy is in general. I can't quite divine a strategy from the things I see them doing, but I don't know enough about this particular to even know what their thinking is behind it. I remember that the Bush administration, George W. Bush, had concerns about the Council, and so I just don't know what their thinking is.
Taking a look at the two recent summits, the G7 summit in Quebec and the Singapore meeting with Chairman Kim, from your perspective, would you consider the president being a rational leader?
I think he's a rational leader in the sense that he's making judgments based on whatever his strategy is, based on his understanding of events. And so I don't question his rationality. I question some of his values, especially with respect to the things going on in the States. And so I maybe that's a distinction without a difference, but I don't think of it as a rationality issue. I think of it as a values issue.
If you consider his foreign actions as the embassy in Israel, as how he's dealing with the Iran deal, and now the latest, the North Korean work that he's done, he might be proven right after all. What would happen if things go the way he wanted? Would he consider that, or would you consider that being a foreign success for him, or is that just the way he works?
Well, if he's able to achieve complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, that'd be a great thing for the entire world. I think that that space still has to be watched. I don't know where we're headed, but sure, that'd be a success, and I would root for that. And as an American, I should always root for the American president, even if I have concerns about his ethics. I think that'd be a great thing. But again, I don't know whether that's where we're going to end up.
What do you believe is his relationship to Russia, especially the relationship to Russia was part of what you had to deal with? One day he asked to lower the sanctions because Vladimir Putin is a terrible leader. The next day he's willing to say, well, let's lower the sanctions because he's such a great leader. Same goes for China. He hails Xi for his role in solving the Korean crisis. Next day he puts up new tariffs on Chinese trade goods. Why does he work that way? Or do you have an idea what his policies behind it?
There's a lot I can't explain about President Trump, and a lot of circumstances in which I can't divine a strategy. With respect to Russia, I've been struck since I first had an encounter with President Trump about his reluctance to criticize Russia, even in private. I can see reasons why a president would want in public to be thoughtful about the statements he makes about another foreign leader, but even in private he wouldn't criticize Vladimir Putin in Russia, and that always struck me. I don't know what's behind that, but it's concerning, especially coming from an FBI role where counterintelligence was one of our responsibilities.
Do you have a feeling that he's working against his Republican majority in Congress? Because there's always a strong position towards Russia.
I don't know what the Republicans stand for in the United States anymore. They used to say they were a party that believed the character was destiny, that values matters above all else, that free trade was critical, that being tough on adversaries like Russia was critical, and I don't see that. Oh, and that spending had to be restrained. I don't see any of that anymore. So honestly, and I don't mean this sarcastically, I don't know what the Republicans stand for anymore.
Talking about the tariffs that have just been put up in Germany and Europe, obviously, and most lately China are very worried about the way things go on the trade business. Do you believe that we are already in the middle of a trade war?
I don't know whether I'd call it a trade war. Certainly we see shots fired that could lead to war, and I hope cooler heads prevail. There's that great expression in English, the only thing new is the history you don't know. anyone who understands the history and economics that have governed and pushed us towards free trade understands that it's in everyone's interest to have free and fair trade. So I wouldn't characterize it yet as a trade war. I hope cooler heads prevail and weapons are put back in the holster.
Would you compare the way that the president acts as somewhat comparable to people like Putin or Erdogan in Turkey, or is that not a proper idea to compare those?
I'm not sure I'd make the comparison. He says a lot of things supportive of authoritarian leaders like Erdogan or Putin. But again, it's tough to divine a consistent theme from President Trump. He says a lot of things that are concerning, and then there's not much follow-through. That said, I'm very concerned about his attacks on the justice institutions in the United States. Even if he doesn't follow through, his words alone undercut the rule of law in the states, and that matters. That, to me, doesn't put him in the same boat with a Putin, for example, but it's still concerning.
In your book, you described various White House scenarios that seem rather odd to us. You've experienced also various presidents before. What is the difference in this administration, if you would describe that?
Well, there's differences on a lot of levels. At the management level, it's chaotic, and the leadership culture is one that, at least in my experience, is not well designed to get the truth spoken by advisors to the president. And then maybe at the highest level and most important level, there's an absence of moral character in our president. There's much written in the United States speculating about, does he have a mental impairment, those kinds of things. I don't believe that. I think he's a mentally competent person. As I've said before, I just think he's morally incompetent, and that sets a very disturbing tone for an administration.
You compared him to a forest fire. Why is that?
Because he is doing and will continue to do great damage to the values and norms at the heart of the United States, the rule of law, equal protection of the laws, the truth, which is the touchstone of our entire culture. But he's a forest fire in the sense that he'll do damage, but that good things will grow in the wake of that fire. I'm essentially an optimist.
How long is that going to take? There's a possibility the Democratic and the Republican Party are not even in the state to say they have a candidate. Do you have any idea that this could actually last for 7 years? More,
it could, sure. It could burn for another 6 years, but it will stop burning, and something good will grow in its wake. I already see it in the states. We've been in positions like this before. I come from an amazing country that's turbulent and often has difficult periods of retrenchment and reaction when we have progress in the United States. We will continue an upward slope to our line. This will be a downward dip, but it will stop and we will be better in the wake of it.
What will you consider being the transatlantic relations at this point?
Well, at the top level, the political level, there's obviously turbulence and difficulty with the president tweeting things about Germany, including things that are just not true about Germany. That's obviously causes friction. The good news is those relationships are stronger, more important, and more long-lasting than any one leader. He will no longer be president at some point, but the relationship between Germany and the United States and all of the whole transatlantic alliance will still be vital to both of us and will outlast any leader.
Talking about the George W. Bush administration, we always felt around the Iraq War that it was very icy. On that level, how would you compare that? How it is right now?
Some tensions, but this seems more vitriolic, especially when the President of the United States is saying things that aren't true, demonstrably not true about a country like Germany. That's different than, we had, for example, friction between France and the United States over the Iraq War and other things. That was a policy-based friction. This seems more personal, but that's President Trump's way to personalize everything. In either case, the alliances, the relationships are too strong and will survive the problem.
The president fired two very close people around him and brought in Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. That doesn't make it easier. What do you expect from that shift within 1 year, or a little over in a year?
What do I expect from those personnel changes?
Like, I mean, from the change in, like he even threw out generals, and those were the people where Europe always thought the adults in the room. Now he's changing that as well. So what is the shift going to lead to in this personnel?
It's not clear to me. Mike Pompeo is a very smart and principled person. It's someone I worked well with when he was at CIA and I was as FBI director. But I don't know what it portends, except there will be more change. I mean, Donald Trump stains all of those around him. And so I wouldn't expect those people to be in their jobs very long. If I were there, I wouldn't get a long-term lease on a home in Washington if that's not your home. And so I would expect more turbulence and change. This is just not a leader who creates an environment that attracts great talent and retains great talent. That's been true throughout his business career. He actually didn't build anything significant in terms of an organization, and I wouldn't expect that to change now.
You once referred to meeting him first as another meeting you had years back as when you were a prosecutor with the mafia, with the mob. Would you still say that was an accurate comparison just from the feeling you had around it?
It would in this sense. I wasn't trying to say Donald Trump is out like a mobster robbing banks or breaking people's legs. But he does create around him a leadership culture that reminded me, and still does, of La Cosa Nostra. The boss is at the center. The only thing that matters is what you can do for the boss. It's not about anything broader or bigger. It's about me, me, me. And that's obviously still true.
You said he's been lying and he's portraying American values. What are the values these days? Do you feel, I mean, he has a strong followership and that obviously remains. People believe in him. What are the American values that count these days? Is that shifting to a different, to possibly more negative attitude?
No, I don't think so. I think the values are the same that they've always been. Right? America is a culture governed by optimism, a commitment to the rule of law, to freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of opportunity. All those things are still true about the United States. But there's always going to be a minority that is passionate about issues that seem at odds with those values. That doesn't change the way the overwhelming majority of the American people see things. And I think you see those values being brought to the surface with the reaction across the country to what's going on at our southwest border, with putting children in cages and separating them from their families. That's an opportunity for Americans to remember what we stand for, and what we stand for has not changed over time.
But getting back to the term, he's a liar, in the German political system, a chancellor, for instance, who would be, where that would have been proven to have lied various times, he or she would be out of their job. What is different in the United States?
That's a great question. In the long run, I hope nothing, but in the short term, there's a lot of people who have traded a commitment to those kind of values, to truth being the touchstone of a political leader's life, for what they see as gains on other policy issues. The Republican Party, shamefully, has forgotten that truth is the touchstone. In the long run, that's not going to be the case, but in the short term, I think people have traded it away. I never would have imagined that a president of the United States would lie repeatedly, and even his supporters don't deny this, that he lies continually and that it's somehow okay. The danger is he lies so much that we Americans will become numb to it and accept it as a norm somehow. We just can't do that. That's what I hope is my small contribution, is to insist that we stare at this and talk about it so that we return to the norm.
Was the American president, the American system ever prepared for a president like that?
I think the system is prepared in the sense that it will survive and flourish in the wake of a president like this, that it's stronger, that its values are stronger than any one president. And as I said, we've been here before, right? One of the greatest leaders in American history, Abraham Lincoln, was followed by a guy named Andrew Johnson, who was a racist and a liar and a demagogue. He was then followed by Ulysses S. Grant as President of the United States, who restored Reconstruction. We've been in these kinds of places before, and we're stronger than any of these dips in the line.
So you're not questioning the electoral system at all?
No. Donald Trump is legitimately elected President of the United States. By the way, he lost the popular vote, but our system isn't dependent upon the popular vote. That's the way it is, and I respect that. And so what I question is the American people's participation. A whole lot of people didn't vote in the 2016 election. That has to change because we own our leaders and they should reflect our values.
America has always been so proud about the checks and balances system. Is that still in place? Is that still working properly? Because you were saying that he is doing his moves on the judiciary.
It is still in place. It's working unevenly. It's working really well in the court system. The courts have been very attentive to making sure that the law is adhered to, less so in our congressional branch, which our founders intended as an equal branch to the others. They seem to have forgotten that and act like they work for the President of the United States. When our country was founded, the congressional legislative branch was actually the dominant, stronger feature as against the presidency. I think in the long run, we're going to return closer to that model as we did after Watergate. We will see. One of the good things this forest fire will bring is people will remember what the Congress is supposed to do and insist that they start doing it.
Last question. Midterms are coming up in November. Do you expect the behavior of the president, the acting of the president, to have a major impact on the outcome?
Yes. I don't know what that will be, because he's doing two things at the same time. He's energizing the opposition in extraordinary ways. The number of women running for office is amazing and wonderful, but he's also energizing his own base, which is a minority of the American people, with some of the terrible things he says about the rule of law, about immigration. And so I don't know how that will net out. Be interesting to see.
Thank you, Mr. Comey.
Thanks for having me.